Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. On this episode of Daily Palantir, we've got three really interesting things to discuss. Number one, Palantir uploaded a bunch of different videos on their YouTube channel last week with the New York Stock Exchange, with Boston Consulting Group, with Lowe's. One of them stood out to me, and this is the one I want to talk about. It's a 4-minute video, and it's Mount Sinai, one of the largest hospitals in Manhattan. And what this woman said in this little 4-minute speech that she gave about what Palantir is doing with them is just... It not only blew my mind, I think it's going to blow your mind if you haven't heard this part, and it continues to reinforce the thesis of 2024 so far, in my opinion, that Palantir is just going to dominate in healthcare, and like it's going to happen. That's the first thing. Number two, we're going to be talking about Joe Lonsdale, co-founder of Palantir, who went on a podcast recently and talked about the defense tech ecosystem and why Palantir has such a unique advantage, so we're going to be discussing that. And then finally, AIP boot camps are starting to scale. We have some new data from India in regards to what's happening with Palantir's AIP. Don't go anywhere. Big episode. Let's get into it. Let's get into that first video that I want to discuss. This is Mount Sinai for Palantir. I'll stop it periodically, but I mean, it's 4 minutes. And if you haven't seen this, this is just, it only has 2.6 thousand views. So I'm sure a lot of people haven't seen it. This is one of those videos you want to pay attention to when it comes to Palantir. Here we go.
And thank you for inviting me to speak on some of the very exciting work that we are doing with Palantir. I am Carly Gustafson. I'm the Deputy COO for Intrasystem Clinical Operations, and in my role, I oversee our Clinical Command Center. And our Clinical Command Center has actually been designed to serve as the operational backbone of our health system to deliver innovative care models to our patients across campuses. And we use our Clinical Command Center to make sure that our patients get the right care at the right time with the right resources every single time. And when we designed our Clinical Command Center, we thought of it in 3 generations. And the first one was to improve patient flow and throughput across the organization. The second was to improve clinical safety and quality. And then the third was to make sure that we could actually deliver the resources that we deliver in the hospitals in our communities so that our patients actually had other options.
So at its core, make the hospital way more efficient so that the patient, first and foremost, is taken care of. And if they are taken care of, the business of the hospital will begin to do well.
And in order to maximize our efforts, we really knew that we needed to underpin this with technology to really be able to serve as a foundation for all this work. And what I like to say is to dig up all of that little needle in a haystack information that we need in real time in order to be able to do process improvement in real time. And this is where our partnership with Palantir began. And so we went from data ingestion to go live with our first pilot in a little over 4 months. Our initial area of focus was really to be able to pull forward clinical criteria of emergency department patients who met guidelines to be able to be treated for their admission episode of care in our hospital at home or at another campus where there was a bed readily available to be able to go ahead and continue their ongoing treatment so that they weren't just sitting in an overcrowded emergency department. And just to give you a little bit of background, our teams used to go ahead and search this patient criteria in the mornings every single day, only to identify these patients at peak times when our operations in the ED were surging. And so now we're trying to take care of all those new patients, as well as move these patients to other levels of care. And you can imagine that's the perfect collide. And so what we were actually able to do was we said, okay, listen, if we can get a hold of these patients right away and reduce their time in the ED, we'll actually reduce their time on the back end of their length of stay. And that's absolutely what we found. So for all of these eligible patients that could continue their care and treatment elsewhere, we were able to shave 1.5 days off of their length of stay.
That's a big deal. Now, she hasn't even said the thing that is going to blow your mind, but the idea that they could operationalize their data and build out a repository of information that could meaningfully give them the insights to be able to reduce each patient's stay by 1.5 days on average. And if you've ever been, with people in the hospital and you've had family in the hospital, people don't want to stay in the hospital. They want to leave, right? Like no one, it's one of those, you want to get out of there. And so to reduce that by 1.5 days means they got the care and the treatment they needed earlier and in a more efficient way to actually allow them to leave the hospital. Now, what she's about to say is really the thing that's going to blow your mind.
And just to give you an idea of what that means for the hospital, we added 20 beds back on average every single month into the hospital without building any net new beds. And right now we're tracking an annualized ROI of $1.5 million. And just to give you a sense, that's one department, one small test of change in one hospital. So we're looking forward over
I'm going to play that again if it went over your head.
And right now, we're tracking an annualized ROI of $1.5 million. And just to give you a sense, that's one department, one small test of change in one hospital. So we're looking.
So that right there is what we need to talk about. They made one change in regards to where patients and how patients would get care, and particularly around emergency room care patients. That was in one hospital. That was in one department of that hospital. And that was one change they made. There's a variety of different changes they can probably make it even better. You nurse staffing. I mean, there's so much stuff they could do. One change they made within that one department, within one hospital, ROI projected $1.5 million. Mount Sinai is one of the largest hospitals in New York. It has a variety of different branches all throughout the state. They serve thousands and thousands of patients. I think they have something close to like 40,000 employees. There's a lot of people that work in this hospital. There's a lot of work to get done. And this is why, I get excited about Palantir, because then you got everyone talking about the valuation, the PE. I'm like, dude, forget about all that. Like, just for a second, forget about all that. That stuff's important. You guys know how much I preach valuation. You know how much I care about that. Like, I get it. And that stuff matters. And there's a time and place to understand if you should buy the stock because of all of those corresponding metrics. But the business, like the actual thesis of the business, eventually the stock price plays out when that business thesis is working. And when someone says that, within one change we make in one department of one hospital, we're saving $1.5 million, you start to really wonder, like, wait a second. Like, what is this software doing? And if you expand that across the entire part of your hospital chains that exist throughout the country, what does that mean for the overall savings for the hospital? Then what does that mean for Palantir? Because at the end of the day, a hospital, if they can get patients, which means she said they opened up 20 more beds, if they can get more patients in more beds and get them out more efficiently, it's a business at the end of the day. Like, it's a business of something that really matters, which is, patient care. But the more patients they see, the more they're able to make money off of, which means the more efficient they are to get patients in and out of the door and give the best quality of care, which forces you to be efficient, the more money they can make. So when you've got Palantir software enabling all of that to happen and you're saving $1.5 million, I mean, it's just like, and that's one change at one department in one hospital. You just imagine how much more the hospital business can expand, how much better quality care you can give to patients, and then how much is that worth to pay for Palantir every single year if they're enabling all that change. That to me is very exciting. And again, if you hadn't seen that video, I'm happy this one got your attention to it. 1.5 million ROI on Mount Sinai from a change that Palantir made is a very big deal. And excited to see how this partnership continues to go for Palantir. Seems like healthcare is the vertical to expand in. All right, next thing I want to show is a clip from Joe Lonsdale, former, co-founder of Palantir. He used to work at Palantir, does not work at Palantir anymore, but he is one of the original co-founders. And here he's asked a question about VCs giving money to defense technology. This is from the Realignment podcast, so shout out to this podcast. I'll put it in the description as well. And essentially, Joe Lonsdale runs a VC firm, venture capital. For those that don't know what VC is, they take big amounts of money, take big bets on risky ideas, lose a lot of money, and then one of them hits and they make all their money back times 3. That is the goal of venture capital. And that's why America is so unique in that venture capital uniquely provides capital, money to people that have big ideas and want to try and start them and see what happens. So here, Joe Lonsdale is going to talk about the nature of defense tech spending in the VC space and why it's so unique that there's not that many companies that are there other than, the one we know about, Palantir, which is one of the main companies that won.
Had Mike Slaw of the Defense Venture Summit on an hour ago, and he made the point that there were 110 different VCs that were at the big summit a few weeks ago. My question to him, which he diplomatically didn't answer, was: are there 110 defense companies to fund in the first place? What response would you have to that framework?
There's not. There's not 110 to fund that are going to be great. Now, there are 110 attempts I'm sure you could make. Listen, so I think there's been a little over 2,000 unicorns overall in America the last 20, 25 years. And I think there's maybe been about 8 defense unicorns. So not a lot. Are there going to be more defense unicorns? Sure. I already am involved in a couple more. Of the 8, I'm lucky. I've started 2 of those. I've backed 3 of them early. So I've been pretty involved in the defense side. But that's not a lot of companies, right? We've built a lot more unicorns in a lot of other areas. We've backed dozens of unicorns in other areas. And so defense, if you're a great VC, defense is only ever going to be a part of what you do. I think if you're a great VC, if you're only doing defense, you better have a smaller fund because there's not enough room. There's not going to be 20 more giant, things to fund. I think of the ones that have really worked, I think it's Palantir, it's SpaceX, it's Anduril. Those are the 3 primes that have kind of got to really the $10 billion plus mark now. And there'll probably be 3 or 4 new primes to make that mark. And those are very important for our country. And I love that all these people are coming in, bringing talent, bringing money. That's good for the U.S., full stop. There probably is too much money, and people are going to lose money as well, and they don't know what they're doing.
So the reason I wanted to play that clip is because it's incredibly interesting how Joe Lonsdale basically says there's 3 companies that have really worked in the defense tech ecosystem. You got Palantir, you got SpaceX, and Anduril. All 3 of them major government contracts. All 3 of them incredibly important in terms of the work that they're doing right now across the world, geopolitically. You got Ukraine, all this stuff going on. And what he's speaking to is this idea that translates to what's happening in the modern day economy for defense technology. When Palantir started, there weren't a lot of VCs that were ready to fund them. That's just why they had to get funded by the United States government's CIA VC fund, the InQtel, versus an Andreessen Horowitz or Sequoia, some of these companies that have backed Google and Amazon and Airbnb before they ultimately became very big. So you've got a few amount of defense tech companies historically. So the funding for those defense tech companies, if you're not getting your money into an Anduril or a Palantir and you're a defense tech VC, you're really not going to get your money into any major defense tech company because there's just not that many there. And it speaks to, in my opinion, the unique moat that Palantir has particularly developed in the government space. Now, defense tech is changing. We've seen that all throughout the year. We've covered extensively on this channel that there are more and more startups that are trying to sell into the government and use defense technology as the primary business model, which means instead of going to the consumer or going to commercial, they're trying to go to the government. And why? Because selfishly, if you can sell to the government, this is kind of the whole Palantir thesis, you can easily sell to commercial. In fact, Silicon Valley was premised off the idea of building technology for the military and then bringing that to commercial enterprises and to consumers. So that Palantir model has played out in terms of building Gotham for the government, which took years and years of strenuous labor, work, bureaucracy, politics, and then bringing that to the consumer and bringing that to the commercial enterprises, which is what Palantir has been able to do, and so far successfully has been able to execute on that. Which means if there's not that many defense tech companies in the past that have historically been able to get funded because they just weren't there and they didn't have the caliber to be able to sell to the government, and Palantir was able to uniquely stand out, I believe that only furthers the moat of Palantir today and reinforces one of the biggest things that we've talked about on the channel, but still has not gotten, I think, the coverage that it deserves, and we'll see how progress occurs in the future on this product, which is FedStart. FedStart is Palantir's way of basically becoming a pseudo VC fund without having an equity stake in a ton of these different startups that are trying to sell to the government. We now have officially 11 partners that work with us, but still being able to make money off of these companies that get funded by venture capitalists and now have the money to be able to operate and try to be able to sell into the defense tech ecosystem. So company A wants to sell government procurement software that makes it more easy for the government to buy and sell from vendors, particularly in defense space, Army, military, DoD. Andreessen Horowitz, big VC fund, gives them, let's call it a $70 million Series A round. So they have $70 million to be able to try to execute on this. They then go to companies like Palantir that know how to sell to the government, have a unique moat in selling to the government. As Joe Lonsdale said, them, Anduril, and SpaceX have been the only 3 successful companies really that have developed a prime relationship with the government that are rooted in software to be able to sell to the government in the face of Lockheed Martins and Raytheons, etc. Those are the 3 tech startups that were really able to pull it off. And they go to a Palantir and say, hey, how do we figure it out? Palantir says, hey, give us a couple $1 million, and not only will we consult with you, but we will help you actually get securitized, accredited, etc., given that Palantir is IL level 6 accreditation, only Amazon and Microsoft have that same level of accreditation, to then be able to help you sell into the government. What Joe Lonsdale is speaking about in terms of the lack of defense tech startups that have gotten successfully funded and then reached that $10 billion market cap speaks to not only the moat of Palantir, but the overall moat they have in the government space for new companies that are going to be trying to compete with them. Because if you're going to compete with them, you're going to have to use them and use their resources to even have a chance to compete. That is the whole nature of FedStart. And what's also really important about this is that, look, this is not a joke. At the end of the day, it's very hard to become a defense technology startup that wins in the government space. Like, you've got to continuously get money from the government. $886 billion was just announced in terms of spending for the government. All of that money is not just going to go to startups. It's going to go to companies that actually know how to get the job done. They're not just going to take a risk on you, which means if you're a defense tech startup, we know that $34 billion went into funding these defense tech startups in 2023. Now there's money from VCs that are looking for a return on their defense tech investment, and that means to get a return, you got to get some government deals. If you want to get some government deals, you might just have to go through Palantir, because it's not going to be that easy given the bureaucracy that exists and the politics that exists that Palantir has gone through for many years, and they've talked about this publicly in terms of how hard or difficult it was to really get the government to believe in them to be able to get those deals. And so what I think Lonsdale is speaking about here, given he's been in the defense tech space, he's started a lot of these companies, he's backed a lot of these companies, is that it's very hard to establish a moat. Palantir has. And if they've been able to establish that moat, the question just becomes, how much could they help these other defense tech startups that want to win? And could that be a really cool part of their business that brings in some additional revenue every single year for other defense tech startups that want to get into the government? Okay, final thing we're talking about today, very last quick update. We got an awesome tweet here by this Twitter account at DMAD1 on a LinkedIn post of Palantir and India. So let's read from this. Recently, Accenture hosted one of the biggest Palantir AIP bootcamps with around 100 attendees at the Accenture India Bengaluru Innovation Hub. The session was highly interactive with active participation from both customers and Accenture, making it a great forum for India-based customers and partner engineering teams to experience the power of Palantir AIP. We want to give a huge shout out to Accenture for organizing this successful event. If you missed this incredible opportunity, don't worry, you can still join us at different bootcamps. So this is really cool. This is Palantir going international. Accenture, this is why we have a partnership with Accenture. They're one of our premier consulting partners along with them in PwC. And Accenture said, hey, we're going to host a bootcamp. There's 100 different attendees. These 100 different attendees all probably work at different companies across India. And they got to access the power of Palantir's AIP platform working within this interactive session. This to me is just, I like seeing stuff like this because it just continues to reinforce my bull narrative around AIP, which is that it is getting more exposure. It's getting more developers excited. Through these boot camps, more people are getting proof of concepts, or like things that actually work, right? Because they're using their data. So it's not just this PowerPoint, essentially. It's this actual piece of software they can use and utilize with their own data, and they can play with, and they're like, oh, this is something that's useful. This is something that I could take to my boss, and they can actually understand if this is something we want to have worth working throughout our entire enterprise. These boot camps are a big deal, and in Q4 I am looking forward to understanding what are the metrics on how those boot camps are scaling and how much could they scale, because I think the world is Palantir's oyster now when it comes to these boot camps. It seems like it's the most interactive way of selling and going to market. And when you've got Accenture in India having 100 different attendees learn about Palantir's AIP that are hopefully going to learn more about it, spread more about the news, understand what's going on, and maybe get their companies to buy into the software, you've just got a platform that is massively scaling. I mean, we can go to Sweden, we can go to Finland, we can go to Ireland, we can go to Germany, we can go to Japan. We can do these boot camps all across the world. And our consulting partners like Fujitsu, which is a technology consulting firm, can do AIP boot camps for us in Japan, which they talked about doing a couple months ago in December when they interviewed with Alex Carper on Fox Business. There are so many different opportunities for this. We just need to make it happen. And if we do, then I think Palantir is going to be in a good position. All right, that's it for me. Thank you guys so much for listening and watching. DailyPalantir.substack.com. Please make sure to subscribe to the free email newsletter every single day. If you're a Palantir investor, you should be subscribed to this newsletter. You have no excuse not to be. Free every single day, 5-minute read. And yeah, that's it for me. Thank you guys so much for listening and watching. I will see you on the next one.